Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday. Thursday, September 19th, 2019. Is today Talk Like a Pirate Day? I think I already saw that tweeted earlier today, but I don't know. I expected like fireworks or something. I keep saying each year it sneaks up on me, and I know it's in September, right? So today may actually be Talk Like a Pirate Day, and I might even have some messages about that reminding me that that's the case. We will check up and see. At any rate, we've changed things over to Talk Like a Trader Day just to keep up with the news about, the guy who purports to be our president, Donald Trump. Donald R. Trump. Is it Donald J. Trump? But I'm going to just say it's Donald R. Trump so that we can use the pirate thing. Donald Trump did a treason again. And basically we have him dead to rights and should just start thinking about what to do when it comes to arresting a president and putting him on trial for treason. I think, many people have guessed this. I did see Hunter retweeted earlier this morning, but tweeted last night. It's really only a matter of days until the Republican Party as a whole is commenting to the press that treason is one of those things that the president is allowed to do if he feels like it, like declassifying information that he accidentally spilled to people. People are constructing timelines of events to try to take a guess at what it was that Trump was doing or who did it, and I think it's come down to Trump. I think we knew that for the past couple of days since finding out that the acting director of national intelligence, I can't play the sound effect yet without cutting off our fantastic music, which is barely audible, I think, at this point in the background, but screws me up if I don't hear it. Anyway, we've pretty much narrowed it down to the president or someone immediately surrounding him, and there are some fascinating timelines out there for when the report was filed, and now we have information from the Washington Post. I'm not exactly certain how they come into this information, but this is info that says that the complaint has to do with conversations that the president had with a foreign leader within some certain space of time prior to the report, and in fact that a promise of some kind was made to this foreign leader concerning what exactly we don't know, but this sort of information would tend to indicate that someone with inside knowledge about what's actually in the complaint has spilled the beans, and I think that's fine, and I hate beans, and you should spill them at every opportunity, I think. I have a love-hate relationship, I guess, with the beans, and spilling them is fine. And, if you spill them on the plate, okay, I'll have those. And if you spill them on the floor, really, honestly, there's too many beans around here to begin with. So, we'll check in with all of the latest speculation on these stories. I think the Washington Post's reporting has it that they were able to speak not off the record, but anonymously, for our purposes, with two high-ranking former members of the intelligence community who gave them the information about what was going on and what the complaints were about. And speculation, thanks to everyone's reconstruction of the timeline, is that, it probably is the former director of national intelligence, Dan Coats, or his deputy, Sue Gordon, who was, you may recall, forced out the same day. I was commenting last night on the story as it was being circulated, pointing out that McGuire, who is, of course, as we all know, the acting director of national intelligence, got into that position. They were saying in the article, I think, in the Post article, that he'd been forced into the position, essentially, or had landed on his lap following the resignation of Dan Coats. But that leaves out the fact that that job would and should have fallen to Sue Gordon, but for her own forced resignation. Although now it's starting to make it sound like the timeline is that Coates may have, as opposed to saying, you need to resign because the president doesn't want you in the job and he deserves to have his appointees and we're both going to resign and get out of the way for whoever it is that he wants to put in there. But it's beginning to sound like it may have been Coates telling Gordon, you got to get out of here. All of this stuff is going to hit the fan. And we know what happens when stuff and fans come into close contact, I guess. And it doesn't necessarily have to be fecal matter. Quite honestly, it's all a mess when it hits the fan. And, well, he may have been warning her off of this. You don't want to be caught up in this whole treason thing. You should leave for your own good. And then, of course, Trump tried to install one of his cronies from Congress, and somehow, I can't even remember how that nomination failed and fell apart. And it must have been something awful in the dossier on, was it Ratcliffe, who they wanted to put into that position, and that didn't work out. So now we have McGuire, and the most charitable read of what's happening with him is that he's stuck between a rock and a hard place. The administration lawyers scrambling to come up with legal justification for his refusal so far to turn over this report to the Intelligence Committee upon their request, and of course is according to law. But, well, what's law when it doesn't tell you what to do with somebody who violates it? We don't know. And it's a large-scale mess. Other important pieces of news, I guess we should check in on what's happening in Israel, if anybody actually knows. Less important is Donald Trump being photographed getting clambering, perhaps, or is that too active? Look, it's too active a description for his sloth-like hauling himself up the stairs to Air Force One, photographed as the wind blew his tie up over his shoulder and the tails of his circus tent of a jacket up, exposing, well, his back pockets, apparently stuffed with cash, which was kind of interesting. I mean, I guess you wouldn't necessarily be surprised to see a billionaire's pockets bulging with cash, but well, very often these days everybody goes cashless and carries the credit cards. And presidents, I think, pretty much across the board don't carry wallets and cash, and when they need things paid for, assistants produce those things. He's saying that he carries $20 bills with him, which is what was sticking out of his pocket. I would have thought a billionaire would have had, $100 bills sticking out of his pocket, but no. Looks like I'm going to have to manually go over to pop Skype up to the front of the windows here. Good morning, Greg.
Hey, good morning. I just thought you wanted to leave me hanging there on the yardarm. Arr.
Yeah, yar. It was just, usually, when Skype goes active, it pops up to the front, but not so on the computer today.
International Talk Like a Pirate Day, of course.
Yes, right, exactly. And we haven't begun our celebration quite yet. Yeah, but I guess frivolous story of the day, Trump walking up the steps to Air Force One and photographed with $20 bills sticking out of his back pocket, which is, I don't know, not a big deal unless anyone stuffed them there. I would think that they'd be stuffing larger bills in there. He says it's for tipping. I will do the thing. If you've been tipped $20 by Donald Trump, please contact us so we can tell everybody the story.
That's definitely a Farenthold story.
Yeah, he'll have to track that down. And anybody in California get $20 from Donald Trump. But it's just, I just put it under, I'll file it for now, not under suspicious activity, but just slovenly activity. It's the president with the toilet paper stuck to his shoe, money sticking out of his pockets, hair standing up on end. He's just a disturbing physical specimen, and that's that.
I'd rather think about International Talk Like a Pirate Day.
We are going to
have this picture in my mind of Donald Trump walking on the stairs to the plane with toilet paper on his shoe. I have pictures of John Bercow, Speaker of the House of Commons just sitting there saying "arder, arder,
arder." Now, if Trump, I would have thought we'd sooner.
It's a much more pleasant, thing
so.
to have fixed in your mind.
I would think, though, that we'd much sooner see Donald Trump with a $20 bill stuck to his shoe than anything else.
But it would be somebody else's money.
Yeah, right. Well,
so
sticky fingers he has ordinarily.
Speaking of John Bercow, today is Thursday. That means in merry old England, this should be the last day of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom ruling on whether prorogation is legal or not. And we may have a decision as soon as tomorrow. And, of course, the other international story, being International Talk Like a Pirate Day, is the other pirate who's actually a Ghanif, who is Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu.
Oh, yeah, him too.
Is still trying to figure out what to do. Some interesting stories on that. The updated vote tallies now have the Blue and White Party, led by Gantz, who is his rival, lead by 2 over Likud, which is Netanyahu's party. And the center-left bloc leads by 2 over the right-wing bloc, which would make you think that the non-Netanyahu forces have the first crack at forming a government. But a lot more information about that than we still have. Lieberman, who is the third party, actually the fourth behind the Arab Party, which is part of the center-left bloc. Lieberman has 8, which is not considered to be either of those others, and so he's still the kingmaker. And, of course, Netanyahu's still pretending like he didn't lose the election, which is funny because one of the things that happened is that he's foregoing the chance to preen at the United Nations. Yes. He's afraid, as somebody pointed out, like many leaders in Africa, that if you come to the United Nations, when you get back, you won't be leader anymore.
Oh, like the Sports Illustrated curse, I guess.
That kind of thing. Lehav Harkov on Twitter says, Netanyahu says he's surprised and disappointed that Gantz from the Blue and White Party refused to meet with him today.
Oh,
sure, no. He is. I mean, the whole thing is that there's one of many ways this can go. One of the ways it can go is that the center-left bloc gets together and decides that Netanyahu is no longer the prime minister because they won, and they form a bloc without him. Another way, what people had been pushing immediately after the election, is that there should be a unity party. That is to say, the 2 largest, which is the Blue and White Party and Likud, should get together and form a unity government, but one that doesn't include Netanyahu. And the problem with that is that Likud is fairly loyal, and certainly part of that right-wing bloc includes the religious parties, which Blue and White wants nothing to do with. And Avigdor Lieberman in that third Kingmaker party also doesn't want to have anything to do with. But Netanyahu owes his position to them, so that's a very difficult negotiation. What may save the unity concept is, a sheer interest on the part of the Likud younger people, which is to say ambition, and that is that they can't rise in the party if Netanyahu is still there. So they have an incentive to abandon him, even though that would be shocking, and yet not so shocking if it actually happens. So nobody there knows quite what's going to happen, but there's some really interesting pieces I found about what's truly going on there. And this is all of importance because, of course, it's such an important strategic ally for the United States. This is a piece by Shmuel Rosner in the New York Times, The End of the Netanyahu Era. The Israel prime minister may be fighting to stay in power, but the dynamics that kept him there for a decade have shifted under his feet, and makes this really interesting point that I hadn't seen before. In the 2 elections that just took place, the dynamics of how the different parties, the Blue and White and Likud, were running the election were quite different, but almost mirror images of each other in the following sense.
Yes.
They were running against a group of people who are marginalized in Israel and disliked. For Likud, that was obvious. They were running against the Arabs.
Yes.
Okay. Running against Palestinians, running against Muslims. And so it was a very anti-Muslim party. Remember the other day we were talking about the fact that Netanyahu's son was showing pictures of people queuing up for what appeared to be an election, and he was claiming these were the Arabs all coming out voting you regular Israelis out of, real America, Israeli style, real Israel,
Yes.
out of power. Of course, he was taking pictures from Istanbul when he did that, but it was clearly a very anti-Arab race. Blue and white, on the other hand, were running against a different, very much disliked group. Not so much talked about. Blue and white was running against ultra-Orthodox parties because the ultra-Orthodox get to not do military service, which is something every Israeli has to do, and they get to get out of other civic duties, but they get subsidies for going to school, studying, and not having to take meth.
What? No math?
No math.
Why not?
Their schools don't have math. You don't need math. Unless you're doing Kabbalah, you don't need math.
Yeah, right. I mean, that was a very big part of it.
I mean, the point is
no
that
calculus anyway,
the Blue and White is a very secular party. And it turns out that because just about everybody has to do military service, put their life on the line, or have their kids put their lives on the line, that stance from the ultra-Orthodox parties is extremely unpopular in Israel.
Yes.
So you had one group running against a disliked minority group. You had another party running against a different disliked minority group. And in 2 elections in a row, they tied. So you could make the argument both are equally disliked. And if you want to get an idea of how much the other Orthodox are disliked, look at the fact that they're just as disliked as the Palestinian Israeli Arabs are. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying it is. So this author makes the point that, in a sense, there might be some seeds of good in there, in the sense that if you want to take the two parties and put them together and say, look, we're really trying to find some sort of centrist position here, that at least for Israel is a centrist position, that might be good. That I'm skipping over the discrimination against Arab parts of this story. But from the perspective of this Israeli writer trying to figure out who's voting in this election, it turns out that perhaps some unity kind of thing could come out of this. But that just makes the point that others have noted that really the difference between the parties is that Likud is explicitly apartheid, whereas Blue and White is only marginally, implicitly apartheid.
I see.
And that issue still hasn't begun to even be touched. But there's no question that Netanyahu makes it worse. And so there's a lot of people looking forward to the end of his regime. Yeah. So I thought that was awfully interesting. And then Yair Rosenberg has a really, while observing that Netanyahu has campaigned for a year on being in another league internationally, showcasing all his meetings with world leaders, but his domestic prospects deteriorated so much this election that he's foregoing the chance to preen on the world stage. It's that bad. And that's Netanyahu canceling his trip to the UN General Assembly. But he has a nice piece in the tablet, The Truth About Bibi, Israel's Very Dispensable Man, Why Netanyahu's Case for His Re-Election Falls and Fails on His Own Terms. The brilliance of Netanyahu's indispensability argument is that it effectively supersedes any criticism of his conduct, which is pretty reprehensible when you go over things. It casts Netanyahu's indictment for corruption, its alliance with Israel's racist Jewish power party, and his constant capitulation to settlers and the ultra-Orthodox as the price for his geostrategic genius. You may not like me, Bibi argues, but you need me. It's a contention that has previously persuaded many Israeli voters to choose him as the lesser evil. That's like voting for Jack Nicholson and A Few Good Men, you know. You need me on that wall. But once Netanyahu's aura of accomplishment falls away, one is left solely with all the reasons he's unsuited for office and why only 34% of Israelis say they want him to be the next prime minister. This is the man who alienated diaspora Jewry by reneging on a pluralistic prayer space at the Western Wall. Okay, and let me explain to your listeners why that is so hugely important.
Okay.
Yes. It just seems like a thing. But letting the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox decide who gets to pray is in effect getting to decide who's a Jew.
Yes.
So if you're a Reform Jew or if you're not an Orthodox Jew, and Netanyahu's party is saying Israel officially says you don't count,
Right.
that's how you alienate diaspora Jewry, which is not only more secular, but much more diverse than the idea that only a certain amount of those who we officially say can do something.
Right.
He also installed a homophobe as interim education minister, preserved the prerogative of a retrograde chief rabbinate, and attacked Israel's police for having the temerity to investigate him. In the past, Bibi's countered his own unpopularity by running down his rifles, casting them as lightweights unfit to shoulder the burdens of state. That argument is harder to credit now that he's running against a party headed by 3 former heads of the Israeli armed forces, including Benny Gantz, whom he previously praised profusely before they challenged this position. But in any case, this obsessive emphasis on the individual qualities of a prospective prime minister is itself misguided. Now, interestingly, as it appears that he was going down to defeat, and that still looks at what's going on here, although we don't know, he can always make a deal and then wind up being prime minister again. So it's not over till it's over.
That's what he'll be pursuing. So
it looks like he's got an uphill battle and he's got real issues here. And as this is happening, somebody asks Trump, what do you think of the election? And Trump says, throwing Bibi under the bus, our relationship is with Israel, not any individual.
That's the most diplomatic answer I've ever heard him give to anything.
Right.
That's
but once
good.
I heard that, I thought, oh, God, Netanyahu's going to lose.
Right. Although I guess I would say the same thing about I'll defend Netanyahu to the ends of the earth. Oh, well, he's doomed now. But yeah, it's a good point. That is also what a president should say.
Right.
Okay.
But you know who takes a hit with that, and that's
Right.
Jared.
Yes. Right. He's built
his good friend,
career on this.
because everything that was done was basically Jared going over there asking Netanyahu what to do because Jared doesn't have a clue.
Yeah.
And then saying, okay, here's my plan, which nobody liked, but then again, nobody likes Bibi. So you have this situation that has intricate and very important ties to United States diplomacy and politics. And so Netanyahu not being prime minister is an enormous thing. For Americans, it means that increasingly right-wing apartheid politics of Israel are not official U.S. policy. And if Trump makes that appropriate adjustment to, well, I never even heard of the guy, which is where he's on his way to. And so if Trump makes that adjustment, we might have a little bit more balance in terms of how things are approached, which is kind of important given the fact that we appear to be agitating for another Mideast war, which, of course, is a good idea in everybody's mind, right?
Yes, I think
it's probably Jared's idea.
He heard it somewhere.
Probably from John Bolton. So
Yeah.
Jared doesn't really
too.
have ideas of his own. He just,
He
talks
may
to
be
people
lost
and
at
then
sea
eats them.
at this point. Yeah. Well, that's why the Secret Service needs jet skis.
Right. So for that reason, I think that it's really well worthwhile following all of this. It's important to follow the stuff that's happening in England so we know how this is being resolved, because the populism of a Boris Johnson being defeated, or the naked apartheid populism of a Bibi Netanyahu being defeated, are good things for the world and important for America.
Right. And your neighbor is leaving early today. It's true, and we've talked an awful lot about how connected all of it seems to be, and sort of the international move to battle the globalists, I guess, but that and disguising retrograde fascism as populism across borders, and how dangerous it is to have had these similar actors come to power at the same time. Keeping an eye on its collapse in other countries is an important part of our own domestic story. I don't have much doubt about that. I think we're in solid ground, even though we're venturing out into international politics.
Right. So I found a funny, not so funny correlation here in terms of national international politics.
Okay.
So I was trying to follow the results of the election, at least to the best I could. And I came across, and I'm looking for it to see if I could find it, a tweet from, I believe, yesterday from Bernie Carrick.
Bernie Carrick. Wow.
Remember Bernie?
Yeah.
He was Giuliani's security guy and turned out to be something of a crook.
Right.
But let's see if I could actually find the thing. It was a repeat of a story by Reuters about Netanyahu somehow has made a deal with people and perhaps will wind up, being prime minister again, and his rivals concede. And I was looking at that and saying, we just went through why Netanyahu is in such big trouble and his rivals have a better position on this. Why on earth would his rivals concede? I see now that Bernie Carrick has deleted that tweet, but what he did is he took an old April article from Reuters for the first election.
Yeah.
And tweeted it yesterday as if it were real.
Oh.
And trying to make the point that, you can never count Netanyahu down. You can never count him out.
Okay.
And it turned out that it was a bogus tweet, which he's now deleted. And I couldn't tell whether he was just trying to be a troll and agitate or whether he was really that stupid. And basically, the fact that the tweet doesn't exist today makes me think he's really that stupid.
No. Well, okay. I mean, he's not a bright guy.
But the point there is that figures here that we know by name, who are political figures, are following this election at least as close as we are. And so it has meaning to them.
Interesting.
And they would see a Netanyahu loss as a loss for them.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought to check in with what did Bernie Carrick think of what was going on in the Israeli elections. Although he is so connected to Giuliani, and Giuliani has his fingers in everything because he thinks he's a player. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Okay. Well, lots more to come on Talk Like a Pirate Day, even though we haven't been talking like pirates. But, pirates these days, they're so worldly and they work so hard on losing that accent so that they can work across international borders without detection. It was really a wise plan by them all along. But we remember here, and we'll be back in 2 minutes. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now, everyone, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Happy Talk Like a Pirate Day. I'll be talking like I am the Secretary of Transportation for the rest of the show. I believe Elaine Chao to be a pirate, and we'll explain why one day. But in the meantime...
Secretary for Piracy, that's perfect.
Yes, right. I mean, well, what do you think they're doing transporting all those goods overseas in those ships? You know, shipping magnate is what they call you in polite society when you're a pirate.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're a rich pirate, a successful pirate, and you've worked your way into government and to protect your piracy. You're an international shipping magnate now.
Exactly, also known as a pirate. Mm-hmm. So,
yes,
on the domestic front, to finish the story that you started your broadcast with today.
Okay.
This is from Bloomberg at 3:30 a.m. U.S. intelligence officials have agreed to meet with the House Intelligence Committee, apparently ending a standoff over a still mysterious whistleblowers report.
Oh.
The agreement was announced Wednesday evening, hours before the Washington Post reported, citing unnamed sources, that the complaint involved communications between President Trump and a foreign leader.
Yes.
So Washington Post says we're going with this story, and all of a sudden they're willing to meet with Congress. That's kind of weird.
Bloomberg had that, huh? I didn't see that one.
The White House did not immediately respond to a request for comment on the Post report. Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff also did not immediately respond. The Intelligence Committee Inspector General Michael Atkinson will appear at a closed briefing Thursday morning, that's this morning, to discuss the handling of the whistleblower complaint. The committee said in a statement late Wednesday evening. Also, Acting Director of National Intelligence Joseph McGuire is to testify publicly on September 26th.
Okay, publicly.
Yeah,
Well, okay.
The agreement seemed to head off the latest confrontation between congressional committees that are pursuing investigations of Trump and his administration and a White House that largely refuses to cooperate.
Yes.
So this is good. It's good news. At least they're going to. I don't know if we're going to get anything out of it, but at least they're talking to each other.
Yeah, that's how these things are usually settled, and so it's nice to see, I guess, a little bit of normalcy. That you can still embarrass some people into coming and testifying. I thought that they would be having him testify in a closed session, and it may be that they have one in conjunction with the public session at some point. But all right.
So
we'll
again, let me point out the problem here.
Yes.
And that is contained within the Bloomberg story at the bottom. It says the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, after consulting with the Department of Justice. Who runs the Department? Which pirate runs the Department of Justice again? Responded that no statute required disclosure of the details of this type of complaint to the Congressional Intelligence Committees. So just as with trying to get the international community to follow our lead in what to do about the Saudi oil field attack, which is really a refinery attack, it is very difficult to have faith in the Department of Justice that they're playing fair broker here with deciding what this stuff is really about.
They are not.
They're not.
No.
And so the fact that they said no statute required disclosure makes me think, oh, it's a big deal, and there's probably a statute that requires disclosure.
There is.
I mean, that's how I read it. How else can you read that? You can't trust anything this administration does.
It's crazy.
They're a bunch of pirates.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy how consistently you can be right by simply having that knee-jerk reaction that whatever they say is the opposite of the truth,
much.
and just spit that out and you'll be prophetic.
When Trump accuses his opponents of doing something, you know he did it.
Right.
If he says, I can't trust you because you're dishonest, you know he's talking about himself because he always talks about himself. And when they deny something happened, it probably happened. It's really scary true. So how is this going down with the public? And the answer is really not so well. How do we know that? Well, there's a bunch of polling out, but my conservative friend Brandon, who follows these things, has a nice little tweet here. 7 national polls testing the leading Democrats against Trump were conducted over the last month. Fox, ABC, IBD Tip, Q-Poll, Emerson, HarrisX, and Morning Consult. Biden's average against Trump, Biden 51, Trump 39. The Sanders average, 48-41. Warren's average, 46-42. So on the whole, the American public is saying, I don't really have a lot of confidence in this particular president. Now, it's true that if you ask the public at this particular point in time, who do you think is going to win in 2020, more will say Trump than not. But honestly, I think the public has the same PTSD about 2016 as everybody else. That is to say, Democrats. And even though the facts say that Trump is in bad position for re-election, you say, oh, well, what about 2016 when the polls are wrong? I don't believe any of it, yada, yada, yada. And it could be that was the black swan, that was the one-off that was changed by Comey's late hit plus Russian playing with Facebook, if you want to call it Russian interference or whatever you want to call it, and that 2020 is a different issue. Obviously that's a theory that remains to be seen. But the fact of the matter is that there's plenty of evidence that Democrats are really fired up. For example, let me just give you a couple of 3 stories here. This is all from the pundit roundup toward the bottom here. This is one. This is Politico. I'll actually just give you the links in our little Skype combo so you can follow along.
Sure.
Have it for the roundup later.
Yeah.
Why it will be hard for Trump to win Wisconsin again.
Why?
Milwaukee's Republican suburbs have never really warmed up to the president. That could be a big problem. Few expect the 3 counties that surround the state's largest city to vote Democratic next year, but they say the level of enthusiasm for Trump in Wisconsin's wow counties, Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington, matters a great deal in a state where 3 of the past 5 presidential elections were decided by less than 1%.
Wow counties.
In the state's political equation, they serve as a conservative counterweight to the big Democratic margins traditionally delivered by Milwaukee and Madison. Now remember, Scott Walker is no longer governor,
Right.
And so the suppression efforts won't be the same. Unless the suburban GOP engine delivers its own blowout win for Trump next year, it'll be difficult for him to capture the state a second time. And locally, the party's attempting to expand, Democratic Party is attempting to expand on Clinton's anemic performance in the WOW counties by tapping into a vein of anti-Trump sentiment they say is palpable. Democrats have had teams on the ground organizing for months in the suburbs. I know if we get 40%, we almost guarantee a Democratic victory statewide, Waukesha County Democratic Party Chairman Matt Lowe said. We're seeing so many volunteers every day. I don't think 40% is a total pipe dream. Now, remember, we had the discussion yesterday about white working class voters, and do you ignore them? The goal here is to get 40%, not 51. You're never going to get 51. That's not the point. The point is to keep the margins down or get enough of them to support what you're doing in places like Wisconsin, which have a relatively high percentage of white working class voters.
Yeah.
The Democratic optimism is in part fueled by Trump's underwhelming 2016 performance in the WOW counties where he lagged behind Romney's 2012 pace. Republicans there haven't entirely warmed up to the president since then. Now, this is a different one. This is Doug Metaconis, who's a conservative, but a never Trumper, writing his own blog. And he says Democratic candidates leading Trump by huge margin among Latino voters. A new poll indicates the top-tier Democrats lead President Trump among Latino voters by as much as 40%, a number that, if it holds, could have significant impact on the outcome of the president race in a number of states. All top-tier Democratic presidential candidates leading President Trump by more than 40 percentage points. The Univision poll, conducted by Latino Decisions and North Star Opinion, shows that 73% of Hispanic voters surveyed plan to vote for a Democratic candidate. Only 16% plan to vote for Trump. That's a drop for Trump, who won 19%. And then finally, this one from Democracy Corps, an avowedly Democratic pollster, that's Dan Greenberg's shop, Greenberg Carville. The public pushback against President Trump has produced a level of political engagement the country has never seen before. An elevated anti-Trump Democratic Party consolidated to support the Democratic nominee, whether it's Biden or Warren. They're going out on a limb there, but not a real far one. They are defeating Trump by 9 and 7 points, respectively, with the president stuck at 41, his approval rating. Democrats are poised to push up the 8.6% Democratic margin in the 2018 midterms, a shattering result if achieved. The percent who say they're extremely interested in the election, the percent choosing 10, the top point on a 10-rung ladder, has reached 80%, the highest point in the history of our polling. So people are paying attention is the point. Well, what if it's Joe Biden and he doesn't have the engagement of people are engaged? Trump is the motivator. And again, the Rachel Bidikofer theory, but it's supported by polling like this. Yes, people are engaged. Yes, people are paying attention. They may not have decided exactly which one of the candidates they want to oppose Trump, but they want to oppose Trump.
Yeah, they clearly do. Important corollary to her theory tweeted out last night, but I guess long story short on it, since I don't have it immediately at hand, was I guess it's something. Now I'll have to look for the tweet just to be sure. Did she say she was going to release something? But she was saying last night. Oh, here it is. To be clear. And we like that. Along with empirically demonstrating the role that turnout played in flipping the swing House districts in 2018, my voter file analysis, and this is a more controversial part of her work apparently. There are people who find fault with the methodology, but her voter file analysis will show that in districts where Democrats went out of their way to avoid upsetting Republicans by doing things like holding the president accountable or saying Republicans are thieves or they want to rob you of your health care so that you drop dead.
Abigail Spanberger.
Yeah. All right. Well, in districts where the Dems went out of their way to avoid upsetting Republicans, Republican turnout outperformed Democratic turnout in a Democratic wave election year. So very interesting thing to keep an eye on and something to help with strategic planning. Although, honestly, if you haven't made up your mind yet, it's probably too late.
Well, again, it's a cause and effect argument. Was the fact that the Democrat in that Republican district not all in on impeaching Trump a driver of Republican turnout in a Republican district? Or
Right.
was it something else? I mean, basically, the Republicans are going to turn out for their own reasons. They don't need you insulting them to get them to turn out. What you need to do is get your people to turn out. And you're not going to get your people to turn out by being nice to Trump. That's basically what she's saying.
Yeah, and another way of putting it, which I think a lot of us have already said, is that, look, they are going to label you as horrible socialists and try to drive their people to the polls no matter what you do. So backing off of it.
So find your inner Beto.
Yeah.
Find your inner Beto and say, you know what? We are going to do something about the AR-15s on the street.
Embracing it isn't going to change anything.
It's going to be nuanced, but you're going to say we're just gun grabbing. Well, you know what? This is what we're going to do, okay? Because you're going to say that about us anyway.
Right. Call it what you like. You're going to lie about it.
I'm not totally sold on that. I think that you can poke people in the eye and get them to come out in ways that you otherwise would not. I still don't think calling them deplorable was smart. If you're going to do it in a skilled way. And at the same time, you do have to motivate your own people. And clearly Clinton's voters were not as motivated as they could or should have been because there are folks who stayed home. And you want them to not stay home this time. Well, Trump is the great motivator.
Yeah, that's doing it.
This is hard for politicians. Yeah, it's not you.
Well, it's difficult.
Right? What you say in your district and who you are and what you are doing is not the driver of this election. I'm sorry. It's the president.
Mm-hmm. That's
and they
difficult
don't like
to
that.
Accept.
No,
right.
What I'm doing is important. I make a difference. Yeah, you don't make that much of a difference. Just go out there and do your thing. And
there are going to be places where, honestly, if you insist on holding to that line and say, well, I didn't oppose him on this thing, or I voted with him, 60% of his nominees I approved, or whatever. People are definitely not paying attention to that. I'm certain that that's not moving a great number of votes, or any possibly. But okay. Anyway, now, just sort of out there.
More polling. This one again from Fox News, not just the aggregate, but the Fox News, and we'll get to the primary stuff in a minute, but Fox News has Biden 52, Trump 38, Sanders 48, Trump 40, Warren 46, Trump 40, Harris 42, Trump 40. Again, you may get the impression that Trump is stuck at 38 to 40. That's because he's stuck at 38 to 40.
I see.
But Fox did something really interesting. They took a look at the primary on the Democratic side, and they decided to poll Biden versus Warren head to head.
Okay.
Which I hadn't seen before.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Biden 53, Warren 37.
Huh.
And Bill Schur writes, this, of course, can change, but the assumption that Biden's moderate politics and bipartisan approach are fundamentally out of step with the Democratic primary electorate keeps being disproven. And so what I wrote in looking at that, the pundit roundup, is that the idea of Biden is very popular. He's got the lead. We'll see if he can keep it. And spare us, the polls don't matter. They actually do if you want to know what's going on right now. They can do that without being predictive because these are not. Of course, there's also the pick your own poll problem, which is why you should use aggregates. But if you really want to know what's going on right now, what the polls are telling us is that Biden hasn't collapsed. Warren is in a strong position. We don't know what happens from this point going forward because those numbers can change. But Biden remains the front runner. And Warren is doing very strongly. How strongly is she doing? What about the fact that you got to look at Iowa because the early polls and the early states are very different than national polling? Okay, fine. New polls out of Iowa yesterday as well. The Iowa caucus was polled by Focus on Rural America. Biden at 25, Warren 23, Buttigieg 12, Sanders 9, Klobuchar 8 in Iowa.
Okay. Klobuchar's best performance so far.
And also Pete's. Mayor Pete did very well here. If he's trying to position himself for vice president, that's pretty good. And, of course, it's a terrible number for Bernie.
Yeah. Yes. How were they expecting to do? I don't know.
Everybody was expecting to win, right? And then there's a second poll. This one is Civics, the pollster that also works with Daily Kos, but in this case working with somebody else. Democratic primary poll numbers in Iowa, Warren 24, Biden 16, Sanders 16, Buttigieg 13. Still a strong Mayor Pete, not as bad for Bernie. Harris 5. Harris is doing terribly in polling these days.
Yeah.
Gabbard 4, Klobuchar 3, Yang 3, Steyer 2, Booker 2, O'Rourke 2. So why are those two polls different? Because Iowa's really tough to poll.
Okay. Plus he named more people. I think he just stopped early on the first poll, though.
Yeah, well, that was just what was handy here.
Right.
But it's overall the numbers lately really have not been all that good for Bernie. And this is interesting. In the new Rural America poll, more Democrats have ruled out voting for Bernie Sanders at 46% than are considering him. They asked the question, are you actively considering this person or have you ruled him out?
Okay.
To try to get a sense of, where's the support going to come from?
Yeah. Well,
Ruled out. Andrew Yang, 64% have ruled him out.
64, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Julian Castro, 60% have ruled him out. Castro took a huge hit after that last Democratic debate. Democrats do not like you attacking Joe Biden, especially over his age, especially if it's a botched attack. But Harris, who had a much more skilled attack, also, wound up dropping after that debate as well over time. Okay. So the Democrats don't like family fighting with each other. They just don't. Now, I sent you that list here that Aaron Blake helpfully put together, but listen to these numbers. Ruled out, Bernie Sanders 46, actively considering 43. Beto O'Rourke, ruled out 46, actively considering 33. Klobuchar, ruled out 42, actively considering 40. Reasonable position for her. Cory Booker, ruled out 38, still considering 44. Yeah. So he could surprise Kamala Harris, 37 ruled out, actively considering 48. And by the way, there's lots of rumors that her campaign is saying we're all in for Iowa. It's Iowa or nothing. Now, which is an interesting move for her because it's not necessarily her best state demographically.
Yeah.
But if she loses, she's out. I mean, that's one of those, okay, now that I've seen that, we're done. The way she's running the campaign, if those rumors are true. Joe Biden, 32% ruled out, 58% actively considering. Buttigieg, 27 ruled out, 60% considering. And Elizabeth Warren, 21% ruled out, 70% considering. It's just a really strong poll for Warren and a spate of strong polls for Warren, but also showing residual Biden strength that people, underplay at their peril if they want to see Biden lose.
Okay. Well, that is an interesting question to ask. I'm not entirely certain that everybody has the same idea of what ruling out means, but it's a good indicator. Oh, how will you enter the caucus on caucus night? And whose voice are you likely to hear if for some reason the person
you
you're
just look
thinking
at the
of
numbers,
is
you say, you know what,
unviable?
Elizabeth Warren is in the strongest position. Biden's not bad right behind her, and Mayor Pete is going to be the dark horse that nobody sees coming.
Oddly, kind of mirrors just approaching it from a different direction, but you get the same result. That's pretty strong. I would be pretty confident about that, I guess, if I were the pollster. And I asked the question backwards. I still get the same answer. That's good.
And again, you'd look at these and say, well, these are pretty bad numbers for Bernie, which, by the way, coincides with stories in the press about what's going on with this campaign. I don't know if you've seen those. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, both
I hope you're not.
Iowa and New Hampshire, Bernie is changing up the campaign. There's a Washington Post story, again, from the Pundit Roundup. Bernie Sanders has parted ways with the Iowa political director as of yesterday. At least it's a yesterday story. It may have happened before then.
I see. I'll take it.
In recent weeks, parted ways with the Iowa political director. Campaign confirmed Wednesday, that's yesterday, part of a series of recent staff shakeups in key early states. The campaign announced in March that Jess Mazur would be political director in the First in the Nation caucus state, part of a first wave of early state hires. She's no longer on the team. We'll continue to make moves we feel best position this campaign to win. And I think they did the same thing in New Hampshire recently.
All right. Well, if you're looking to win and you're not winning, then the people who are doing your strategy need to change.
You know what another way of saying not winning is? Losing.
Yeah. All right.
Right? This is not a hit piece on Bernie, but it looks like he's losing in these states, and that's not great for him in terms of positioning. And things are getting really nasty. The Working Families Party, of course, endorsed Warren over Sanders, and Bernie World was very angry about that and taking it out on people online, which looks very ugly.
Yes.
And,
A lot of
it's
weird things
all of
happening.
this, the polls, the stories about campaign shakeups, the reaction to losing the Working Family Party designation
Yes.
are all signs of a campaign that's not where you want it to be.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate thing to be have to be grousing about, and it sets you up, of course, for the accusation that, gosh, no matter what party he tries to run in, everything's rigged against him. How odd is that?
Well,
You know?
his surrogates
Yeah.
can be aggressive.
Yes, that's true. Both
And that's
official
turned a
and
lot of people
non-official.
off. And then if you're doing poorly and you get more aggressive, you only turn more people off.
I guess.
Just saying.
Yeah. It has been very interesting, just as a lesson in sort of a political science lesson, watching the officialdom of the Working Families Party come under attack as sellouts and establishment figures. Which
Yeah,
it's like,
some of them are
welcome to
ex-Bernie
politics,
staffers,
you know?
which is really
Yeah.
why it's so interesting.
Right, and we saw that last time, and we saw. I mean, we've seen it a million times, quite honestly, in the last couple of years. I think the last round of it was Bernie Sanders people accusing various Democratic state and local operations of rigging things against them and not being for the people. But these were all. By that point, the Democratic leadership in a lot of these places were all ex-Dean insurgency staffers and had ousted the establishment to open up the process and had been basically jumping through hoops for years to make things transparent and open and inclusive and open primaries, and it still didn't come out Bernie's way. And it was just kind of funny to watch, except sad, because there were people who took up the mantle of getting involved and then got their first taste of, you will be unfairly tarnished by the losers of the contest, no matter who they are or what part of the spectrum they represent. And you need to be able to withstand that, or say politics isn't for me. And a lot of people said politics wasn't for them. They were replaced by Bernie people who are now being flushed out by other Bernie people. So very interesting.
Right. Anyway, so that's the summary for today, but I will end with this. I just showed this from Jake Sherman, going back to the topic Israeli elections that we started with.
All right.
Jacob Kornblue tweeted this: Bibi lost this election, plain and simple. If he were thinking straight, and he's not, he'd step down, work out a plea deal, and travel to the U.S. to make a lot of cash, book deal, lectures, and consulting. He's already in the books of history as the longest-serving PM.
Yes.
Actually, it may be serious enough so he goes to jail, and that's not why he's doing this. But
No.
Jake Sherman retweeted that and said, a reality that's dawning on many observers. He's basically lost.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Well, we will. We have to. We'll see what happens, as the president says, and that seems to be his attitude towards this too.
Yep.
Okay.
Alrighty. So with that, there's my summary for today. An extra pundit roundup for this week, but everything we talked about is all there, with a few other things as well. I note, just for the record, because it's something that we've been following, and that's on the MIT scandal.
Yes.
This piece from the Boston Globe: more than 60 of MIT's leading female faculty members confront university president over Epstein. They're really ticked off that MIT took this money, and MIT, I think, is now only realizing what a big scandal this is. L. Raphael Reif, who's the president, said, I understand I've let you down and damaged your trust in me, and that our actions have injured both the Institute's reputation and the fabric of our community. I'm deeply sorry. Really, I think what everybody's pushing for is to make sure that this so-called outside review is more than just an outside review by lawyers that you've hired to represent you for 50 years, and therefore how much outside is that really?
Well, they'll have to take some blame and take some hits, and a lot of people a lot of them have already resigned, but some people will have to go, and yeah, they'll have a nice, fun debate on the board of trustees about guidelines for accepting large gifts now, and that gets in everybody's way, because nothing makes people at universities happier than large gifts. And now you have to do paperwork and have a bureaucracy to make sure that you're not taking large gifts from, human traffickers, pedophiles, various people with whom you wouldn't want to be associated.
Right. Okay. Anyway,
Okay.
that's the story, and I'll be back on Monday. And
Okay.
I guess we'll talk again. We'll see what happens between now and Monday. But it sounds like a lot. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what's happening with the behind doors discussion about what this whistleblower thing is. I know they were talking about it all morning on cable TV, and that's good
Right.
because it's a big story, and at least we need some resolution on it.
Yeah, and something pirates as well. I feel like
Arr.
we've underplayed the pirate aspect of this somehow. But
A
okay.
whole bunch of them. There are a bunch of pirates. All right.
Very good.
I'm not sure it's that fair because I think pirates do have honor, but I'm not sure this bunch does. Take care, and I will
Okay.
talk to you on Monday.
Very good. All right. Thanks, Greg. Greg, we could say we're really stretching and try to come up with something. However, good timing for Sean Spicer. It occurs to me now as I see yet another picture of him in the neon day glow green, variously described as merengue band or pirate shirt. I think we all left over from the Seinfeld show. Think of this as a pirate shirt. Although I don't know how intimidating that kind of shirt really was. I think we have a very weird idea of what pirates may really have looked like. I feel like they were a scruffier bunch than we are giving them credit for through folklore. But I have no data on that, and we'll have to see what the polls have to say about that sort of thing. Okay, let's see. Where to? Well, first of all, to a break. We have been brought right up to the brink of our short 1-minute break. That gives us a brief chance to regroup and decide in which direction we're going. I have a feeling we gotta head back to the whistleblower complaint and make sure we're up to date on it and share people's various theories and timelines, because something really, really, really crazy and difficult to deal with is likely to come out of this. And I don't know what to say about it other than it has the potential for shaking our democracy and our concept of ourselves as a self-governing people to its core. Okay, well, we'll take a 1-minute break and try some vocal exercises, which have been suggested to me to try to get rid of our amphibious friend that's taken up residence in my throat. All right, 1 minute. Be back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm not really sure I am a big believer in the vocal exercise idea, but I don't really know anything about them. And I don't know, I always thought of vocal exercises as something that might help clear up different problems besides or other than the proverbial frog and throat thing. But I suppose that's as good an explanation for why people would do them as any. I'll have to look some up and see if there are any that are specific to dealing with that. But mostly my vocal exercises consist of coughing and hacking, and drinking a lot of water, and basically trying to see if that'll do anything. And that hasn't been particularly effective. So maybe I discount the effectiveness of vocal exercises. But I never really thought of myself as the kind of person who would sit before a microphone 5-10 minutes before a show, and I don't know what. My idea of vocal exercises comes from like Bugs Bunny opera singer guy. Like you squirt, I don't know what, down your throat with that, what do they call that thing? Atomizer, I guess. And go like roll R's and go brr, brr, me in front of a microphone. I have literally no idea what you would do in terms of actual vocal exercises. Plenty of, videos, TED Talks, and free reports on the internet about how to do this most effectively. And I don't know whether they're dealing with just plain old, well, you need to cough. That's your problem, and you should just do that. Alum. Is that what's in the, is that the suggestion, or is that what's in the atomizer? Is that in the water? And astringent. See, yes, that makes sense to me. And I think I settled the other day on just drinking acidic drinks quickly, or even wine actually dries things up pretty quickly if the wine is dry enough. It doesn't really do anything good for your concentration, certainly. So is that the cartoon The alum. Okay. Well, I'll get one of those. See, that always looked to me as a young kid, that's like, well, that's what my grandmother's perfume bottles look like. And I can't imagine that squirting perfume down your throat makes a great deal of sense. Luckily, I had the good sense, even at the young age of, let's say, 4 or 5, to say, nah, that's got to be disgusting tasting and probably poisonous. Don't even try that, even if you're playing. So, other kids maybe not so smart. There are kids who are allegedly teenagers eating detergent pods out there. So, not everybody is so wise. We'll admit that. Okay. This is not the biggest story in America at the moment. What is, of course, is, I guess, the Washington Post is the latest hard news reporting that they've been willing to commit to paper or digital ink, and that has been cleared by legal departments. So we'll run with that. That story came out in the evening, late evening, yesterday. Greg Miller, Ellen Nakashima, and Shane Harris on the headline here. Trump's communications with a foreign leader are part of whistleblower complaint that spurred standoff between spy chief and Congress, former officials say. It's a big story because it's a big headline, not actual size of the print, but it's so long that they must have had some fight about these things. We have to shorten this up. This is a very overly long headline, but we need it this way because it has to convey exactly what's going on. We'll pretend that's some sort of a stand-in for the importance of the detail and nuance. Here's the piece. The whistleblower complaint, and we're all up to date on this, right? They may or may not go over the actual timeline or recap the situation, but I think we all got that from yesterday's show. If you missed the show and missed the news for the past couple of days, I don't know if I can help you with that, but okay. Best thing to do is just run through this, I think. The whistleblower complaint that has triggered a tense showdown, I think reportedly now solved in the sense that the acting DNI has decided to come and testify. And I think that the committee has also called the Inspector General to come and tell us what the hell's going on from his perspective here. The whistleblower complaint that has triggered this tense showdown between the U.S. intelligence community and Congress involves President Trump's communications with a foreign leader, according to 2 former U.S. officials familiar with the matter. Everyone trying to guess who the former U.S. officials are, and a large number of people are fixating on that could just be Dan Coats and Sue Gordon. Maybe. Some people have even speculated John Bolton. Seems less likely, but Bolton's clearly pissed about something. I don't know whether he would have known about this thing or not. I mean, he should be in a position to know about it, but I don't know for sure. The timing might not be right. Keep that in mind, though. Lots of people making lots of accusations. Trump's interaction with the foreign leader, this is the big problem, included a, quote, promise that was regarded as so troubling. How troubling was it? It's so troubling that it prompted, yes, an official in the U.S. intelligence community to file a formal whistleblower complaint with the Inspector General for the intelligence community, said the former officials, who may also be the complainants, speaking on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the matter publicly. Okay. It was not immediately clear which foreign leader Trump was speaking with or what he pledged to deliver, but his direct involvement in the matter has not been previously disclosed. Everyone's just been guessing it based on the fact that the acting director of national intelligence said that he was directed from above not to turn over this report. But that by itself didn't necessarily mean that the same person who was ordering the report not to be turned over was the one implicated in the report. It could simply be a high-ranking official protecting someone else. But as it turns out, Trump's main interest is, of course, in himself, and he only really takes action on behalf of himself. So I guess it's really not terribly surprising to find out that he was protecting himself, and that was because he knew he had done wrong here in this. He doesn't have a real sense of what that means. It just, this could be a problem for me. Someone told me it could be a problem, so I believe it, and I want to protect myself. So there you have that. Again, not sure which foreign leader Trump was speaking with or what he pledged to deliver. Lots of guesses on that, and a lot of people have been trying to track down which foreign leaders he spoke to within some reasonable amount of time prior to the complaint. One of the problems with this president and this presidency is we don't have a comprehensive, we don't have any way of knowing comprehensively which foreign leaders he's spoken to when, because he actively attempts to avoid the creation of records on this. We have lots of discussions with foreign leaders for which he has had notes destroyed or has confiscated notes from translators, or which the United States government has made no announcement officially about the existence of the conversation, and we only find out anything about it by reading the official reports of the governments on the other end of the line, some of whom can be trusted and some of whom can't. It's a real mess, and it's why you can't conduct foreign policy like he conducts it. He, like everything else, his foreign policy is why don't you just ism, and the reason you don't just do things like that is it lands you in trouble. And part of the reason that you have to create a record behind yourself, part of the reason is, of course, regular old transparency, and part of the reason is accountability. There will be questions asked. Who did you talk to? And what did you discuss? And people will want to know how things happened. And if you haven't created a record, they're going to be free to speculate and create their own record for you. And if you don't have any countervailing evidence that you weren't a traitor, you might find yourself in trouble, but for the fact that you're president of the United States, and we're all pre-programmed to believe that presidents of the United States do only patriotic things because they're the top patriot in the country. Not always true. Anyway, so it wasn't immediately clear which foreign leader he was speaking to, but his direct involvement in the matter hasn't been previously disclosed. It raises new questions about the president's handling of sensitive information and may further strain his relationship with U.S. spy agencies. One former official said the communication was a phone call, so that helps narrow things down if that person is right. The White House declined to comment late Wednesday night. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence and a lawyer representing the whistleblower declined to comment. Intelligence Community Inspector General Michael Atkinson determined that the complaint was credible and troubling enough to be considered a matter of urgent concern, which you should keep in mind is not simply him saying, golly, this is important. It is a legal threshold, urgent concern. A legal threshold that requires notification of congressional oversight committees. So here we now encounter problem one. It's a matter of urgent concern. It requires notification, but the notification didn't happen in a timely fashion. What do you do? So next step in the development of the problem, Acting Director of National Intelligence Joseph McGuire has, to this point, or to the point last night, refused to share details about Trump's alleged transgression with lawmakers. Notice the jump that's made here by the writers. Has refused to share details about Trump's alleged transgression with lawmakers. Up to the point of the publication of this article, they were just guessing about whose transgression it was. So this refusal has touched off a legal and political dispute that has spilled into public view and prompted speculation that the spy chief is improperly protecting the president. And he is. The dispute is expected to escalate Thursday. That's today. So are we ready for the escalation? When Atkinson, the IG, is scheduled to appear before the House Intelligence Committee in a classified session closed to the public. Thereby, there's the origin of my confusion about things, that now that the article has been published, Greg was telling us, it sounds like McGuire, too, has agreed to testify, and that will be public maybe. But the IG's testimony will be classified. Okay. The hearing is the latest move by committee chairman Adam Schiff to compel U.S. intelligence officials to disclose the full details of the whistleblower complaint to Congress. This is, of course, required by law, but with this administration, you have to maneuver and try to leverage things in order to get what you're supposed to be entitled to by law, similar to the tax returns, quite honestly. McGuire has agreed to testify before the panel next week, according to a statement filed. It wasn't filed or anything, but a statement by Schiff. He declined to comment for this article. McGuire did, I assume? Okay. The Inspector General determined that this complaint is both credible and urgent. Schiff said in the statement released Wednesday evening, the committee places the highest importance on the protection of whistleblowers and their complaints to Congress. The complaint was filed with Atkinson's staff on August 12th, and that was what led to everyone's timeline speculations. August 12th, a date on which Trump was at his golf resort in New Jersey, which is always a pretty good random chance, quite honestly. But okay, officially, that's what he was doing that day. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the violation happened that day. But keep that in mind. White House records indicate that Trump had conversations or interactions with at least 5 foreign leaders in the preceding 5 weeks. I'm not certain how they settled on 5 weeks as the threshold here, but I don't know. I think maybe people went looking back, trying to figure out which foreign leader he spoke to, and looked back to as far as they felt they had to, probably to include some foreign leaders about whom we have the preconceived notion, based on good, solid evidence from Trump's aberrant behavior in the past and his willingness to flirt with treason as often as possible. And they probably said, there's no reason why 5 weeks should be the line, but 5 weeks is probably how far back they had to go in order to include both Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin and maybe one of the Middle Eastern figures and a few other common suspects, I guess, because there's no reason why 5 weeks. I don't know that I believe that a whistleblower's complaint that is so urgent and concerning could wait that long. I don't know that if I saw something, would I wait 5 weeks to file that report? I guess I would if I knew it also meant the end of my career. So I guess that's a possibility. So I don't know. I don't know how valid the 5 week circle really is. But there you have it. That's my commentary on the article. Among them, the 5 leaders, the conversations anyway, was a call with Russian President Vladimir Putin that the White House initiated on July 31st. From July 31st, would you wait until August 12th to file it? Some of this time is writing and proofreading, right? Okay. Want to make sure you get it right. Trump also received at least 2 letters from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un during the summer, describing them as beautiful messages, but that's just his word for everything. In June, Trump said publicly that he was opposed to certain CIA spying operations against North Korea, referring to a Wall Street Journal report that the agency had recruited Kim's half-brother. Trump said, quote, "I would tell him that would not happen under my auspices," unquote. I don't know where he learned the word auspices, but congratulations to him. That doesn't raise immediate suspicion to me. And the idea of getting it in a letter form and, did Trump even respond with a written note of some kind? Is that where the promise was made? Is that what we're supposed to believe? Trump met with other foreign leaders at the White House in July, including the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, and the Emir of Qatar. So I don't know whether they stretched back to see how far back do we have to go in order to loop in Qatar, or Qatar, as some people say. But I would guess the Prime Minister of the Netherlands is probably an unlikely source for all of this, but I guess you never know. And what if they, I guess behind all of this is, what do you believe Trump would promise anybody? And that, and again, just his dotardly way of conducting official business. He just, with his why don't you justism approach to everything, he probably, I wonder whether this necessarily means, this complaint, that he like actively said, the most sinister possible interpretation of all this is, say, speaking to Putin and saying, I promise we're going to destroy NATO for you. That would be urgent. I would have some concerns about that, and I would report that. But it could also be as dumb as, I promise we'll look into it, or whatever. And, you know, it may just be that, well, skilled diplomats will train a president not to say something specifically in those terms. I promise that, blah, blah, blah. Even though that may be your intention to convey in the strongest possible terms your commitment to pursuing this agreed upon goal. But we avoid in diplomacy world using words like promise because that carries certain connotations that could get you in trouble or box you in ways that it becomes difficult for presidents to deal with if they have shame, which this one doesn't. So I'm not, I don't know whether I believe that this is active, intentional malevolence and treason, or whether it's just him saying, I don't understand why there's so many stupid rules, and he stumbles into something dumb. But I have to believe that, I guess if you're going to resign as Director of National Intelligence or Deputy Director of National Intelligence over something like this, it's going to be the more serious of the two. All right, continuing with the article. Trump's handling of classified information has been a source of concern to U.S. intelligence officials since the outset of his presidency. In May of 2017, Trump revealed classified information about espionage operations in Syria to senior Russian officials in the Oval Office, disclosures that prompted a scramble among White House officials to contain the potential damage. And nobody resigned, as I recall, over that or filed any whistleblower complaints. Statements and letters exchanged between the offices of the DNI and the House Intelligence Committee in recent days have pointed at the White House without directly implicating the president. But I guess that's now out the window, and we are. Schiff has said that he was told the complaint concerned, quote, conduct by someone outside of the intelligence community, unquote. Jason Kletenich, we're still going with that pronunciation, the DNI General Counsel, noted in a letter sent to congressional leaders on Tuesday that the activity at the root of the complaint involves confidential and potentially privileged communications, which would tend to implicate someone way, way high up. Somebody, probably the president, had to have had at least some part of this conversation in order to privilege it, if you're following normal rules, which they're not. The dispute has put McGuire thrust into the DNI job in an acting capacity, or we should say in an acting capacity, with the resignation of Daniel Coates last month, and they don't mention here also the resignation immediately thereafter of Sue Gordon, Coates' top deputy. That dispute has put him in this job after Coates and Gordon resigned, and at the center of a politically perilous conflict with constitutional implications. Schiff has demanded full disclosure of the whistleblower complaint. McGuire has defended his refusal by asserting that the subject of the complaint is beyond his jurisdiction. He is, of course, the Director of National Intelligence, so there's not a whole lot that really, in the normal realm of international affairs that would be above his jurisdiction. You would be, to claim as much would be entering into that weird territory that I've hinted at before, and teased a little bit today when we talked about Hunter's reaction to all of this, that Republicans would be eventually forced to say that treason is something that the president can engage in legally and you can't arrest him for it. But we've toyed with this idea before that a more sophisticated actor might actually do the same thing but frame it in terms of, listen, as President of the United States, foreign policy and foreign relations is my prerogative. And though it would ordinarily shock people to find out that the President of the United States is actively interested in straight up political union with Russia, and to merge the two political units into one, or to tie their foreign policies together in such a way that there was no separation between them, and that the United States would intentionally put its influence and military power and everything else that stands behind its diplomatic persuasive abilities behind the foreign policy goals of Russia. Is it within the president's prerogative to do so? I guess there's a theory by which you could say yes, so long as there's no corrupt motive for it. Except that in this day and age, probably the truth is that even if there is a corrupt motive for it, you can't do it if there's a corrupt motive for it that is readily provable, and which you are willing to prove and prosecute. And various hurdles stand in the way of that. But generally speaking, I think you could make a argument without having to remind everybody all the time that you're bending the rules because there are no rules. It would still be arguably within the prerogative of the president to say, I believe that the wisest foreign policy course for us is to align ourselves unwaveringly with the Russians, as if they were dictating our policy. Yes, I believe that's the safest thing for the United States and the people of the United States and for our national security. Many people would disagree. Many people would say that's a terrible basis on which to approach anything. But they're not president and I am, and as unfortunate as that is, it is what it is. Could you go that way? You could. I guess maybe, fortunately for us, Trump is so personally inept and so personally corrupt that he makes it difficult to get there without reasonably solid evidence that he's simply doing it for corrupt motive. And he keeps it in the news. I mean, it's, like I said, a Nixon might have been able to get away with a lot more in this than he is, walking around with $20 bills sticking out of his pants pockets and selling various assets around the world and collecting emoluments wherever. We should get through this because there's more emolument stories to get to, too, not to mention many other things. So, defenders of McGuire disputed that he is subverting legal requirements to protect Trump. Not that he has legal requirements to protect Trump, but that he is subverting other legal requirements, the reporting requirements. They dispute that he's subverting those reporting requirements for the reason that he wants to protect Trump. They instead say that he's trapped in a legitimate legal predicament and that he has made his displeasure clear to officials at the Justice Department and White House. I don't know whether that part is worth anything. What legal predicament? The legal predicament apparently is essentially, I don't know what to do with a whistleblower complaint that just goes right to the heart of the nightmare situation. The president is a national security risk. More than a risk, I've caught him dead to rights revealing important national security information to foreign leaders in ways that endanger the national security of the United States and threaten to continue to do so. What do I do with that? Given, for instance, the belief inside the Department of Justice that no matter what happens, you can't indict the president. Espionage is an indictable offense. Even if you actually had just outright, honest-to-God treason that was provable and two witnesses and involved waging war against the United States and the whole bit, where would you go with that? The legal predicament, in other words, is I have on the one hand, the immovable object, the irresistible force, let's assign it to that, the irresistible force of, I have the president caught in, if not outright treasonous, then certainly, I don't know what to say, behavior that damages the national security in serious and immediate ways. And on the other hand, the immovable object of purported presidential immunity. That's the purported legal predicament. What do you do with it? You could seek the help of other institutions and co-equal branches of the United States government. That might be an interesting thing to do. You could look at the Constitution and see who else have we empowered to try to deal with these things and talk to them. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. Except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on it. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Speaking about the president's treason and trying to get a handle on it, let's see. We'll continue with this article. Now I'm trying to remember exactly what thought this placed in my head earlier as we were going into break. But yes, there are options for what to do if you find yourself in this legitimate legal predicament. You could consult with perhaps our basic governing document, find out who else might rise to the level. If I can't figure out what to do when one of my immovable objects or irresistible forces in the equation is the President of the United States, I could look around to see, is there anyone with commensurate power, a co-equal that I could speak to? One of them is Congress, and wouldn't you know it, in this statute here, which admittedly doesn't rise to the level of constitutional importance, but because it's just a statute. But the statute tells me that the co-equal branch that deals with this would be Congress. Why not get down to the business of speaking with them rather than doing the absolute opposite and avoiding speaking with them? Well, now that this has all been laid out for us in this article and we get to the point where we're reasoning this out, and the only reasonable thing to do in this case is to speak to Congress, guess what they've decided to do? They're going to speak to Congress. So, I don't know. Maybe the system might eventually work. I doubt it. But anyway, it will move the ball along, and we'll all feel like progress is being made until time runs out and everything's mooted. Okay. After fielding the complaint on August 12th, Atkinson, the Inspector General, submitted it to McGuire 2 weeks later. By law, I don't know how long they had to do that, but 2 weeks seems like it might be enough. By law, McGuire is required to transmit such complaints to Congress within 7 days. Why? Because of the political theory exercise we just went through. He's a member of the executive branch. If the whistleblower complaint might not necessarily have to have anything to do with the executive branch, but there's a co-equal branch out there that has an interest in this game. That's just basic constitutional theory. You're going to have to tell them. And of course, the reason the statute would tell them you have to do that is because who writes the statutes? The Congress does. They're going to obviously err on the side of giving themselves more information. But okay, there's also, I think, a constitutional argument for what to do when you have The executive, which, being unitary, as the Republicans believe it is, would mean that the rest of the intelligence community assigned to investigate this under normal circumstances would have a very strong inclination to clear one of its own, in fact, its own boss, who can shower them with favors and or pardons or money or what have you, in this case, if they were to acquit him. So for accountability's sake, Congress needs to be brought into the loop, because the thinking initially was that with so many other actors, almost certainly including some of whom would be members of the opposite party, there would be less incentive for everyone to keep quiet on this. So, in this case, he's required, in all cases, to transmit those complaints to Congress within 7 days. The Director of National Intelligence, in this case, of course, the acting director. But guess what? He did. McGuire, the IG, Atkinson, the IG, gives the whistleblower complaint to McGuire 2 weeks after it's filed. McGuire has 1 week to hand it to Congress, but he didn't do it. He refrained, it says here, from doing so after turning for legal guidance to officials at the Justice Department, which is just where you don't want to go in order to avoid the entanglements of conflicts of interest. But because the law was written without really truly contemplating what would happen with a Manchurian candidate president, the Justice Department sounded like a perfectly reasonable place to go for guidance because it's a legal issue. Unfortunately, that's been captured too. In a sign of Atkinson's discomfort with the situation, if that makes you feel any differently about him, the Inspector General informed the House and Senate Intelligence Committees of the existence of the whistleblower complaint without revealing its substance in early September. Schiff responded with almost immediate indignation, firing off a letter demanding a copy of the complaint, because he was supposed to get one, and warning that he was prepared to subpoena senior U.S. intelligence officials. The DNI has asserted that lawyers determined that there was no notification requirement, even though there was a notification requirement. But why did they believe there wasn't one? Because the whistleblower complaint did not constitute an urgent concern that was, quote, within the responsibility and authority of McGuire's office. Do you see the game they're playing here? The IG had, in fact, designated this as being of urgent concern. And that designation triggers all sorts of things, including the requirement that McGuire hand over the report to Congress within 7 days. How can we avoid, he asked, handing this report over within 7 days, or indeed at all? And the Justice Department's answer was, well, you only need to hand it over within 7 days if there's an urgent concern. And the IG, but I can't help that. The IG says there is one. Yes. But an urgent concern, what does that mean? An urgent concern would only be when it's of concern to you, not whether or not it personally worries you that the president is a traitor. It might not. But rather, there's a certain statutory regime of what is the responsibility? What is the purview of the Director of National Intelligence, even if you're only there in capacity? And the answer is, well, matters of national intelligence, obviously. Counterintelligence would be included in all of that. You get a pretty general sense. It's a pretty broad mandate, the Director of National Intelligence. But so I'm not certain that helps me. It doesn't help me wiggle out of this thing. Well, okay, bear with me here. Suppose the person being complained about is, I don't know, for sake of argument, let's say President of the United States. He outranks you in every way. He could dismiss you for handing this over. He could dismiss you for handing this over, not just to protect himself, but he could also claim this is within my prerogative as president. You think it's treason. I think it's just plain good for the American people to hand control of the United States government over to Vladimir Putin. I just do, for various reasons. And so you can't report me. In addition to which, of course, remember, you can't indict me for anything, etc., as the legal people say. My claim is that I seek political union with the Russian Federation. That is within my purview, and it is above your pay grade. This is where it becomes important. They tell him, your responsibility and authority doesn't reach up to the level of determining, as only the President of the United States can, that it is in the interests of the United States government and the American people to pursue this course, even though otherwise it might be considered treason or espionage. I think it's wise, and I was elected and handed the responsibility under the Constitution to handle this stuff. You weren't. So although it looks to you like espionage, it really isn't, because I'm the one doing it. And you can't indict me for it anyway. Therefore, Nixon doctrine, it's not illegal if the president does it. And that's it. He kind of bought into that until this article came out and everyone began to think of how absurd and frightening that was. And now he's going to do the opposite, despite what the Department of Justice said. And if you were relying on the Department of Justice for your legal analysis for the right to refuse this stuff, you probably thought things were going pretty good. You had the highest legal authorities available to you advising you on it. But then it turns out that the truth of the matter is that it's such a blatant violation of everything we all thought we were supposed to be able to trust the President of the United States not to do. It was beyond contemplation. And this is so far outside of that norm that even what you might be excused for believing is the best legal advice available to you in the entire country is going to have to go out the window. I would have advised you to throw the Justice Department opinion on this out a lot earlier, just based on the fact that they suck as constitutional lawyers. But, they're good for learning a good idea if you want to talk to them about how can I stave off disaster for 7 to 10 days. They're fantastic at delaying justice. And you know what happens, what we say about justice when it's delayed. It's often denied. Legal experts said there are scenarios in which a president's communications with a foreign leader could rise to the level of an urgent concern for the intelligence community, but they also noted that the president has broad authority to decide unilaterally, this is the direction they go here, when to classify or declassify information. I think it would freak people out too much to simply put in the Washington Post that the president has broad authority to decide unilaterally when signing over control of foreign policy to some outside actor isn't simply treason or bribery or something related, but rather wise and good for America. That would freak people out too much. So they already know about the classifying and declassifying of information. That also helps frame the issue. Now, they may be framing the issue correctly. It may simply have been a matter of spilling the beans about something super important, which would otherwise be problematic, but which can be resolved by the fact that we all know, because people have told us we have to assume it, that presidents can't be indicted, and 2, can classify or declassify information at a whim, on the spot, or even retroactively if necessary, in order to avoid trouble. That's just a corollary of you can't indict me for anything, and a corollary of the rule that I can pardon anybody for anything too. Rather than head down those problematic paths, we'll just simply say, oh yeah, that information that I accidentally gave away, I declassified it. When? Right before I accidentally said it. Really? Yes, the president can even do this unconsciously. And if somebody else made this mistake, then I did that for them anyway, because even if I didn't, then fine, I pardoned them. Either way, you're not arresting this guy. So choose your poison? Did I retroactively, remotely, mentally declassify this thing such that the person who spilled the beans, who isn't me, isn't in trouble? Or did I not do it, but they are in trouble, but I'm pardoning them? Which way do you want to play it? Revealing how the United States obtained sensitive information, the article continues, could compromise intelligence means and methods and potentially the lives of sources. Yes, said Joel Brenner, former Inspector General for the National Security Agency. It was unclear whether the whistleblower witnessed Trump's communications with the foreign leader or learned of it through other means. Summaries of such conversations are often distributed among White House staff, although the administration imposed new limits on this practice after Trump's disclosures to Russian officials were revealed. That is actually the end of the article. Again, a little abrupt, but that does make a good point. It could mean that somebody heard him say it or witnessed the conversation, or it could mean that they read the summary of the conversation and then said, oh my God, I've spotted treason. My guess, though, is, well, one, they make the very good point that they stopped doing that as widely as other administrations have done it when they realized, oops, we are giving people evidence of Trump's treason. But I also wonder whether people would go to the length of filing this complaint and speaking anonymously to the Washington Post about it if it wasn't something they had witnessed, as opposed to, if it was something that they read about in a summary, they might be concerned, although maybe that's what caused the delay. Perhaps if it was 5 weeks prior to the filing of the report, that might be the amount of time it takes you to ask yourself, am I sure? Am I positive I'm reading this right, as opposed to I was there, I saw it. So a few other possibilities there. Let's see. I have parked in various places the various timelines and speculations people have assembled about this thing. And let's see. What are the ones that I was determined to share with you that I have so designated here? We've got a few people have tweeted to me, and in general, the following speculations. Let's see. First of all, I put aside a Greg Miller tweet about this article, just sort of posing an additional question. Greg Miller, of course, one of the co-authors of this article. So he says, when he says there's a question to ponder about it, he speaks with some authority. The question here is, given the astonishing things that Trump routinely says about United States intelligence, and he, does say stupid, out-of-the-box things that he can claim to have been declassified immediately, after the fact. But given how routinely he does that, what could he have said or promised on that call that would have been considered so gravely urgent by the intelligence community inspector general? In other words, we've been numbed to the frequency and seriousness with which he reveals classified information and then just pardons himself essentially from doing so. But people would still have said, this is even so far beyond this routine disclosure that I have to go through formal channels here. We have to lodge a complaint. That is a good question. Let's see. Other things that I parked here. I have Jed Sugarman's speculation on this here. Let me open this up. Jed Sugarman is a professor at Fordham Law, and his thinking on it, including the Reuters report on McGuire's appointment to the vacancy created by Dan Coates and then later by Sue Gordon. He says this: is it just a coincidence, he asks, that Trump forced out DNI Dan Coates 5 weeks ago and replaced him with acting DNI Joseph McGuire roughly when a whistleblower sent urgent information about Trump's promise to a foreign leader. I'm constructing a timeline, and here it is. And he has to correct the record, I think, a little bit later towards the end when he says, oh, yes, wait, the 5 weeks thing he picked up on, I guess, from the article that they searched back 5 weeks for contacts, but he corrects it later on down here in his fourth tweet. Correction, Trump forced out the uncooperative, in his view, DNI Dan Coats 7 weeks ago, coinciding with some suspected contacts with foreign leaders. Trump first tries to appoint his loyalist Ratcliffe, but fails, so then he ditches him 5 weeks ago in order to appoint McGuire as acting DNI. But back to the top of his thread here. Here's the timeline he puts together. The whistleblower's complaint was filed with Atkinson's office on August 12th. White House records indicate Trump had conversations with at least 5 foreign leaders in the preceding 5 weeks, including Putin, that the White House initiated on July 31st. And other timelines remind us that they were supposedly, Trump's claim was they were discussing the forest fires in Siberia and had, can we help you put out the forest fires? And nobody really believed that that was the case. And I guess subsequent reporting, according to some of the timelines, was that they were discussing the, quote, normalization of relations between the two countries, which is, ordinarily is the kind of thing that you discuss when you have, it might be something that we might do with North Korea, where we don't have normal diplomatic relations. I don't think that, I guess maybe with all the sanctions in place, normalization of relations is something you might discuss in those terms, but it's also a good way, that's what I would label discussions that go considerably further, like I am going to purposefully align our military and diplomatic might behind the agenda of the foreign policy of Vladimir Putin and or the Russian Federation for the purposes of political union or otherwise. Anyway, Jed Sugarman continues. So August 12th is when the complaint's filed. July 31st, there was a conversation with Putin that nobody knew what the hell they were doing. Trump announced Dan Coats would step down as Director of National Intelligence after a fraught tenure marked by tension with the Oval Office, and he tapped one of his staunch defenders, Representative John Ratcliffe, to take over. That would be July 28th, right before speaking with Russia, or with Putin about the forest fires / normalization of relations. Doesn't work out with Ratcliffe, ends up being McGuire. And it just so happens, just before the Inspector General received the whistleblower's info on August 12th, Trump scrambled to get McGuire into office, meaning Coats would be out by mid-August. It is conceivable that Trump had heard something was afoot before August 12th. There was this weird, I do remember there being some sort of weird feeling about how quickly Coats was moving out and how weird it was that Sue Gordon's decision was, I'm leaving same day. That was rather odd. After fielding the complaint on August 12th, Inspector General Atkinson submitted it to acting DNI McGuire 2 weeks later. McGuire has since refused to share this complaint with Congress. My goodness, Jed says, how lucky Trump had gotten rid of that pesky Coats just in time. This does assume, though, and I mean, I know that they haven't gotten along all that well, Coats and Trump, but I do have a little bit of trouble just given the history of the people who have involved themselves with Trump and what they've done with their reputations and dignity. Do we believe that Dan Coats would absolutely have turned over this whistleblower complaint on time and in compliance with the statute, or would he have played just as McGuire has? I don't know. This next tweet says this Qatar whistleblower nugget in the article was interesting. Trump met with other foreign leaders, we know, including prime ministers of Pakistan and Netherlands and the Emir of Qatar. Putin and Qatar keep popping up in this storyline. Remarkable. Good point. Jed Sugarman then points to someone else on Twitter, Operative X-Ray. I don't know if that makes you trust them more or less, but this person constructed an even more concise timeline that goes July 28th, Coates is resigning soon, everyone. July 31st, Trump, Putin, quote, wildfire call. August 2nd, U.S. pulls out of the INF treaty, which Russia wanted out of as well, right? That was the Intermediate Nuclear Forces, isn't that right? INF? Okay. August 6th, Huntsman. Remember him? He used to be ambassador to China under the last Democratic president, now ambassador to Russia. Now that Rex Tillerson is out, Trump's Russian ambassador resigns in the middle of all this. On the 8th of August, Coates tells Sue Gordon to resign ASAP. That's a very different way of putting things, right? You need to get out of here too. August 12th, the whistleblower complaint is filed. August 15th, Coates is out. So is Sue Gordon. And by September 9th, of course, we find out the news that the CIA has, at some point, extracted a key spy from Russia in 2017. That leads lots of people to speculate that maybe one of the things that Trump may have discussed with Vladimir Putin was, you say there's a spy that we had inside the Kremlin and that you would like to get your hands on, but the United States government, under the auspices of the CIA, not me, extracted him from Russia in order to avoid his falling into your hands, and you would like to get a hold of him. I promise I will do that. That's the sort of thing which might trigger urgent concern among top intelligence officials, right? Jed then goes on and says, I'm just going to keep collecting good timelines because lots of people are spotting striking coincidences in late summer in questionable foreign policy moves. This other person whose timeline he has here notes all the same things here, but adds to it the September 6th word that $770 million is being cut from the fund that Obama put in place to protect NATO and Europe from Russian aggression. I think we may have missed that one. Other people brought up, for instance, the freezing and then later unfreezing by the Trump White House of funds appropriated for Ukraine to purchase weapons in order to actively combat Russian incursion in Crimea and elsewhere in eastern Ukraine. That too would be a matter of urgent concern and something that someone might be interested in promising to Vladimir Putin. Sugarman goes on here to say, to summarize, my timeline suggests two possibilities. Both could be true. One, late July, Trump made troubling promises to foreign leaders, perhaps illegal, and to protect himself, he wanted to replace uncooperative Coates with a loyalist hack, but he didn't know he'd been caught and that there had been an inspector general complaint filed. Or two, then early August, maybe he finds out or suspects that he was caught in surveillance or simply his own usual paranoia, which turns out to be right in this case. And his nomination of Ratcliffe is stalled, which means Coates hasn't yet resigned. So he pushed for McGuire so that Coates was out by mid-August. There are a lot of real possibilities out there. And that's not the only collection of timelines out there. The other that I had seen tweeted around included one by T-Pain USA and a response to it from Brian Kenny, who, let's see, he's got in his timeline the Oval Office meetings with Lavrov and Kislyak. It goes a little bit further back than that, but that doesn't, I don't know what the tie is in that case to the August 12th reporting date, but just sort of put out there, since we don't have the time to go through them all anyway. This is the new parlor game in Washington and across the country, and I guess indeed around the world. What is it that drove Trump to treason and drove intelligence officers at a fairly high level by August 12th. It was enthusiasm that did it. Yes, that was not what we actually intended to roll. We wanted the music. But what was it that prompted this thing? And I guess we could start to find out at some point today. I don't know when the hearing with Atkinson starts, but it is scheduled for today. Hopefully they waited until after today's show to start that so that I can get a look at it. And then soon thereafter, or I guess next week, they talk to McGuire, and McGuire can spill to the committee exactly what the big legal predicament was, and then within a few days we'll know, and then within a few hours after that, the Republicans will be excusing it for all time, except if a Democratic president ever dares to do it. Okay, that's the end of Thursday. There's still a pile of things to get to on Friday, including the worsening of Trump's Turnberry emolument scandal, which gets worse and worse with each day and with each hour that the Air Force spends investigating it. But now, time to turn to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy and his organization of the world's problems that are coming crashing down around all of our feet as we speak. What do we got here? Some people might call Trump's interaction with a foreign leader that prompted the whistleblower complaint as a promise, while others would call it a betrayal and selling out America. It all depends on your perspective. Elsewhere on the menu, the House GOP tried to remove the word shooting from a bill about school shootings. That seems like an important inclusion.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
How about we do this? We'll go elsewhere overseas for this news. A Tokyo court has cleared all three former TEPCO executives of negligence over the 2011 Fukushima disaster. And a Moscow court freed an anti-Putin protester from custody. Much, much more as well from all around the world. Next.